Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Old Hunt, where we are still celebrating 10 years of Bloodborne. We are playing through version 1.00 of the Japanese release, and last time, we didn't get super far again, but we did manage to encounter Ebrietas, which feels very big and important to me, because Ebrietas is sort of all through Bloodborne's lore, as I've been pointing out in the course of the playthrough, and as we've come into contact with her in the last episode, there's actually even more lore tied to Ebrietas that we haven't got to. I was hinting at some of that as well last time. But before we move on to that, I did want to bring up some of the things that people have been saying in comments to the last episode, because there's even more to think about when it comes to what may or may not be going on with Ebrietas and how the cosmos is ordered in the world of Bloodborne. So I wanted to bring up some of these people's ideas. First of all, Big Gubosu, once again, coming into the playthrough and speculating that maybe Ebrietas was sort of born and raised in our dimension, right? If we want to think of these versions, these modes of reality as dimensions, I think that might help clean up some of my issue with, like, what is or is not the world of Yharnam, right? Maybe it's its own dimension. Haven't really thought about that. But if we sort of just go with that idea for the time being, it's possible Ebrietas is conceived of as the abandoned Great One because she was abandoned to the world that humanity knows, right? And that she's not on the higher plane that the other Great Ones are on, right? Abandoned not in the sense of the Great Ones ascending to the cosmos or their higher planes of existence, but without a parent or anyone to look after her, and left on her own in the world that humans can know. So I thought that was an interesting idea. Also, noting, of course, that the choir is gone, haven't really delved too deeply into what may have happened there in this playthrough, and, I mean, the answers are sort of scarce. Based on the name that I was pointing out, the Japanese is like messengers from the stars, Seikai Kara no Shisha, in terms of the celestial emissary boss fight. It sort of seems like, because one possibility is the choir turned into celestial emissaries. That seems unlikely, because those ones are pretty explicitly identified as coming from the stars. So, it's sort of unclear where exactly those beings would have come from, but they don't seem to be what happened to the people in the orphanage or the choir. It is possible, right? We go into the choir's sort of home base and we find a bunch of beasts prowling its halls. And what do we know happens when the red moon comes close? The line between man and beast is blurred, right? We have it could be very well that the choir has just fully transformed. It's also possible that they've gone into the nightmare that, we haven't fully gone there. There is a little bit of an indication. There's a note that we can find in the second floor of the lecture hall that, I mean, none of the notes are attributed to anybody, but there's a note in there that would make sense to ascribe to someone in the choir, but maybe not. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I will just sort of lay out that possibility. And so maybe they've got something to do with that. And we know there is someone who is associated with the choir who seems to be involved with the Mensis ritual. It's just sort of a nameplate, really, that gives away that as a potential idea. But I don't know. Speaking of nameplates, by the way, there is also something that I mentioned in the previous episode. I was talking about how maybe the sort of little spiders are like almost like familiars of Ram the Vacuous Spider, and the Celestial Children, the little creatures that I was pointing out as being similar to Ebrietas in the last episode, are they can't really technically be the children of Ebrietas based on the lore that we have from the third umbilical cords, but I mean, they are called Celestial Children, that's their official name, and the official name for the Ram spiders is Children of Ram. Now, I haven't been able to find the Japanese for that, but I'd be kind of surprised if the official guide, which does have the English name for the Children of Ram as the enemy name, didn't base that off of the Japanese. So, I don't know what to make of that exactly, because Ram is also identified as a Great One, and Great Ones can't have children. I sort of wonder if maybe we have these beings that can sort of fall under the influence of Great One, right? Because if we talk about kin of the cosmos being near to the Great Ones, maybe there's sort of another step, right? We have the phantasms that are the familiars of Great Ones. Then we have like a different version of them. Maybe the idea is, because obviously, Bloodborne has a lot to do with transformation. As sort of kin, the next stage of their evolution is to move towards the being that they have gathered around. And so in that sense, they can be thought of the children as the children of the Great One, but the Great One themselves might not necessarily be interested in them. Also, Rom is a little bit of an outlier, right? Rom the vacuous spider, and Rom sort of blocking the rituals of the world from sight. Something very strange and unusual seems to be going on with Rom. So maybe Rom does actually have children, but Ebrietas wouldn't. But then what do we do about the celestial children, the creatures that are like crawling all over the upper cathedral ward, and they're also through the chalice, the Ease chalice. So very unclear, but thought I'd throw out some speculation there because it seems relevant. Also, Rhetorical, sort of on this note, was talking about how it's possible that the celestial children, or as Rhetorical puts it, mutant babies that look like Ariana's child, may just be what happens to all the infants and fetuses that are exposed to the arcane, or possibly some sort of metamorphosis, like the rune, like the anti-clockwise or clockwise metamorphosis runes. And possibly they're orphan babies that will grow up to be kin people, right? So maybe when we're talking about life stages of these sorts of beings, they move from... They may or may not have anything to do with the phantasms, but they may move from the sort of celestial child phase to the celestial emissary stage, and then to something else. Difficult to say. And again, these are all kin. This is all stuff that we know very little about. Also, Rhetorical brings up a fact about the brainsucker enemies, which I think is kind of cool. It's a visual detail. I haven't really been commenting on it that much, but if you pay very close attention to the visuals in the game, and I think it's a little bit easier to see in some of the art book art, but the brainsuckers are actually, like, they seem to be people who have had surgery done on them, because like the tops of their skulls are like stitched together. And then when they get into the grab, it hasn't happened to me in this playthrough, so it hasn't really been that obvious to show off. But when they get you in a grab, there's a protrusion that can shoot out the top of their head, and that's what they stick into you, and they suck out your insight, right? Your actual insight value in the upper right-hand corner of the screen goes down as they draw it out of you. So that's fascinating in its own right, but that seems to be the result of some sort of surgery as opposed to the result of like natural growth. So I figured I'd mention that while we're at it here. Let's see. Rhetorical was also bringing up this idea that I thought was very interesting of Rom having died and ascended, and that would leave Ebrietas behind, right? This getting back to the idea of sort of maybe the mechanism behind how Rom might have moved on from Ebrietas, why Ebrietas might have been abandoned specifically by Rom, right? It's possible that when Great Ones die in the world that we think of as the regular world of Yharnam, that I think of as the regular world of Yharnam, it might be another dream, it might be the regular world pervaded by a dream, that's sort of where I'm leaning, that last one, but whatever the status of that world, perhaps Rom sort of died in that one, and in doing so, ascended to the dimension that is the Moonside Lake, right? Because that seems to be its own little, almost like a pocket dimension, where it's not identified fully, it seems, as a nightmare, but it's this weird space that could otherwise it couldn't possibly exist, right? It's in a lake, but you can run around in it, but when you look up, like, the whole sky is this watery reflection. So it's a very strange space, and it doesn't make a lot of sense as to why it's there. Well, maybe it's a sign of Rom's idiocy that she can't sort of fully form the nightmare sort of realm that you would expect from a Great One. And so you wind up with a Moonside Lake, and so Rom is stuck in this sort of interposed position, and that has something to do with how she's blocking all manner of rituals on this night of the hunt. I thought that was a fascinating idea, so I wanted to bring that one up as well. And speaking of which, here we have another fascinating idea, this one from Rune Esper. And this time we're again talking about the mechanic of ascension tied to Great Ones. However, in this case, we have the idea of the Great Ones ascending to sort of becoming celestial bodies. And I like this idea because it goes with the sort of astrological clocks that you can find all over the world, right? And so both this theory from Rune Esper and also potentially this other theory from Rhetorical, and they might be completely mutually exclusive, they might not, right? Maybe the sign of a Great One ascending into another dimension is it becomes like a constellation in the sky, right? Because the sky and the cosmos are one. So there's some sort of one-to-one relation that ties these things together. But both of those theories, like, you can look around and find other things in the game for it, right? If you think of the death of Great Ones being tied to their ascension, maybe that has something to do with why you can find them in the tomb of the gods, right? And maybe this is why they can sort of be in more than one place at once, because you maybe get rid of their influence in one dimension and they sort of die, but in doing so ascend to another plane and possibly into the cosmos itself, right? Into the stars. And they could exert their influence there. And by studying them, right, in the upper sky through the astrological clocks, you could determine their influence on the world. And maybe that's actually what's happening with the red moon, right? Because the moon, as we'll finally get some evidence to get, like, very hard evidence pretty soon about this, the moon is tied with the presence of a Great One, and its proximity seems to be the trigger for the bestial transformations. So that's, like, direct evidence of a heavenly body being associated with some form of a Great One and exerting its influence on the world. And so, of course, you would want to have something like a set of astrological clocks to study the state of the universe and how that might be impacting the lives of people everywhere in the world. Now, again, this is what I tend to do, is I tend to throw out this, like, mess of ideas. And if you think any of those is interesting and want to maybe delve into a more systemic approach based off of them, please do so. Like, I don't necessarily have a framework to work all that into, like, anything coherent. And like I said, some of these ideas may be contradictory. They might not be. You might be able to find a way to get them to go together. But one way or the other, I think they're interesting to bring up and discuss and just talk about as we celebrate 10 years of Bloodborne. So I wanted to do that. I've also got a couple updates to make as far as my character is concerned before we get once more into the new Ebrietas lore. Figure I'll cover all my bases here. So I did do that chalice dungeoneering I was mentioning in the last episode. I managed to get my vitality up to 49 from 45, so I've gained 4 levels. I've also, switched back to... I had, when I was fighting Ebrietas, equipped the anti-frenzy... I forget which one. It's Lake or Deep Sea. Probably Deep Sea. I had the anti-frenzy Deep Sea rune equipped, so that's how I was able to, not instantly die if I started to build up frenzy. So that was helpful. I've switched back to the rune that boosts my discovery because I was doing that chalice dungeoneering. And I did manage to get a sort of gem setup, so let me go back to the workshop over here. Here we go. And let's just do the gem thing because that's where it makes the most sense. So I have upgraded the rifle spear to +8, not +9, but still that's something. I've got some, I think, pretty nice sort of cursed gems going on here. And these are the ones that seem to give me the biggest bang for my buck. It's not exactly super impressive, right? The numbers, like... I'm getting +81 to my physical attack, +42 to my blood attack, and +32 to arcane. That's because I have a gem that's just adding 32 flat arcane. But that is supposed to be the key right there, right? The flat addition of arcane damage is supposed to seriously impact the output of the rifle spear's blast shot and sort of make it into an almost broken weapon. And I mean, there is, the fact that my skills are not, optimized for this weapon at all. So I guess we're going to sort of test how broken it is or is not just by comparing what's going on with the damage when I can get a bunch of bullets into a single, regular enemy. And then, of course, I have this other cursed gem in here. Cursed gems, you get more powerful positive effects in exchange for a negative effect. So the first cursed gem is lowering my weapon durability by 54, and then my second cursed gem is increasing my stamina costs by 2.5%, right? So that's the trade-offs that I've made there. I don't think that's particularly exciting, Do I need to repair any of these weapons? No, I don't. Okay. So I'm going to be interested to test that out mechanically. Those are the changes that have happened. And now I think we can finally get to that lore that I was mentioning. We have a little bit more that we can talk about in terms of the choir and in terms of Ebrietas. So here's that chalice that I was dungeoneering in. And let's go ahead and get to this description. Oh, look at that. There is die somewhere in the title of it, right? This is the Izu. I always want to pronounce it Is when I see the English spelling, but the Japanese phonetic is Izu, so Is, I guess, would be the more sort of English version where you don't have the katakana vowel after everything, and then no, which is of, and then dai seihai, right? So dai just means big or great, and seihai still means like chalice or holy grail. So this is the great chalice of Is. So pretty straightforward in terms of the translation of the name of the chalice, but let's go and see what we can make of the description. Okay, first line pretty standard. One of the holy chalices that breaks a seal in the underground ruins. In particular, great chalices are things that connect to hidden portions of the ruins. So Is connected to sort of secrets, right? And so delving into the arcane, you'd want to delve into what's secret, makes sense. And it's not just Is, right? This is the great chalice of Is, but great chalices in general have this quality. And that's relevant if you're like going to study all the chalices, because there is a great Tumaru chalice. And so if you want to discover the most hidden away facets of Tumaru, you want to get the great Tumaru chalice. So that's something that is fun if you're getting everything. I'm doubtful that's going to happen in this playthrough, but we'll see. Anyway, let's move on to the second section here, the more unique portion of this chalice description. Okay, so here we're getting a little bit more confirmation as to what's going on with the choir, because technically you look at the very end of the first line in this second section, and you can see that it's identifying the subject as the Great Chalice of Is, but that's all being modified by what comes before it for most of the line, which is the Great East Chalice, which became the cornerstone of the high-level healing church faction, the choir, is the first great chalice brought to the surface since Byrgenwerth, right? So there's some interesting confirmation right there. That's the first two lines, basically, because the first one sort of terminates. You have this sort of double set of modifiers that are going into the Great Chalice of Is. Like, it is a Great Chalice of Is, and then it is the Great Chalice of Is, which became the cornerstone of the choir. And it was the first great chalice, right, which we know from the first section, the first portion of this description, is connected with hidden portions of the ruins of the labyrinth. It's the first one that's come to the surface, that was brought back to the surface since the time of Byrgenwerth. So again, we're getting this potential connection, right? Nothing explicit again, but this potential connection between Byrgenwerth's discovery, because it sounds like Byrgenwerth had a great chalice, possibly this very same one. And we know it sounds like Byrgenwerth had an encounter with the arcane, right? And I've speculated because it's on the Augur of Ebrietas that we find out about that. They have this, encounter with a remnant of the arcane, and that began all this stuff that was the inquiry into the underground ruins, and it was later connected to the choir. I'm getting to know the Augur of Ebrietas description very well just off the top of my head. But all of that seems like it's tying together here, right? It doesn't have to. If you're looking for other ways in which it couldn't, right, you can find them. But it seems to me, and again, I've said this in the last episode, like, this is sort of the rediscovery of something that Byrgenwerth found. Even though it doesn't have to be, right? It just says it's the great chalice, first great chalice that's been brought back to the surface since Byrgenwerth. I mean, presumably since the time of Byrgenwerth, even though it doesn't literally spell that out. So it could have been some other great chalice that Byrgenwerth found, but I think it might have been this one. And then we do get a little bit more explicit confirmation in the final line than I was expecting. And we get some fun linguistic ambiguity along with it, right? So it's saying that ultimately this brought them into contact with Ebrietas, right? Or it granted them audience with Ebrietas. I don't know exactly how you'd want to phrase it, because we're seeing the verb that could be either mieru or mamieru. And in this case, I think it's pretty clear just from the context that we're talking about meeting or encountering, right? Whichever sense of the word that you want to take, right? I think it's probably mamieru. But even if we're just talking about visually seeing, right? They got to see Ebrietas, sort of sounds like they got to meet Ebrietas, right? They had audience with Ebrietas. And there's a fun little bit of lexical ambiguity in there, right? Because who's they? Is it Byrgenwerth? Or is it the choir? I think it's the choir. I also think, because of the other set of lore theories that I have going on here, it's Byrgenwerth. So if you go with sort of my speculative theory, you don't really have to choose, right? It's them, yes. It brought both of them, both Byrgenwerth and the choir, into contact with Ebrietas. The Japanese is open-ended, of course. You choose your referent, whichever you prefer. Or both, like me, I don't know. But there you go. A little bit more like straightforward than I thought it was going to be. But that's the Great Chalice of Ease. And so we know, and of course, if you go into this chalice, the final boss is Ebrietas, right? So that gives you some pretty strong confirmation that, yes, if you're exploring this Great Chalice, you will find Ebrietas. And that also leads to the sort of weird situation of, okay, Ebrietas is here in the world of Yharnam behind the church altar, but she's also in the Great East Chalice? How is that possible? Unclear. But it's one of the sort of fundamental mysteries of Bloodborne, and you can try and work it out, as best as you can. But we're going to move on while we have the opportunity here. I want to get to... Okay, so sort of note, just first of all, the positioning of this set of items, right? Because here we have the empty phantasm shell. Here we have the auger of Ebrietas, which we know is a phantasm, right? You summon the abandoned Great One Ebrietas by using phantasms as a medium, right? So in terms of the item that we're using, we're like holding up a phantasm and we're using that as the medium to summon a portion of Ebrietas. This is the empty phantasm shell. This right here, right? This is almost like a little mini like phantasm section within the consumable item space. So already just from the like categorization, like you can sort of start to classify this as a phantasm. And then of course visually, right? It's all pretty well linked together. This sort of bluish arcane like hazy image, this visual, right? And then you have the same thing here. Looks like, this might have been even a shell for this sort of creature. And then you have this weird thing, very similar color scheme, very similar sort of shape, looks like a very similar sort of creature. Distinct, of course, but similar. So that's interesting. Anyway, as far as this item name and description, this is a call beyond. That's a really good translation, because yobikake is like to call out, and it's like you're trying to reach someone, right? It just has this implication of calling out and trying to reach someone. And then you have kanata, which is like into the distance, right? Afar. And then a, which is directional. And then no after a, to say that the call that's happening, the final part, yobikake, the call out to someone, is happening into, right, from the direction of the particle there, the distance, right, into the great beyond, into afar. So you can put those concepts together and you get a call beyond, right? It's the official translation, and I think it nails it. So I'm not even going to come up with, I'm not even going to throw out a more literal version. I think that suffices. That's pretty cool. As for the description, okay, so this is one of the hidden rites of the Healing Church's upper layer, the choir, right? And so once again, we're seeing, right, like upper layer very literally, or I don't even think there's a better literal way to put it than just upper layer, but it gets across the idea that these are like higher ups in the Healing Church. And of course, they literally live in the upper cathedral ward, right? All that sort of upward direction. Very straightforward, I think, but very consistent in terms of how they're described and themed. Anyway, this is one of their hidden rites. And I sort of wonder if that makes this augur of Ebrietas another type of rite. It would make sense. It never really calls it that, but maybe. Anyway, as for just a call beyond itself, let's move past the first line. Okay, and once again, this is where we get to the information that I was looking for. We're going to get some explicit confirmation that we are, in fact, using a phantasm. This is a phantasm. Makes sense that it's in this little phantasm mini section of the consumables list, because the text here is, once the healing church made contact with high-dimensional blackness by using phantasms as a medium. Right, so once again, we're using phantasms as a medium. And they're making contact, like sesshoku, like they're like literally coming into contact with, right? Not make contact as in terms of like the radio contact that I was talking about, even though they may or may not have been sending out a signal, but they're like sesshoku, they're like brushing up against this higher dimensional darkness. That's an interesting set of concepts that the Japanese just strings together. I wonder how the official translation handled that. I don't have that memorized. So I'll put that on screen in editing and probably be impressed by the solution. But anyway, let's move on to the second part of this central section here. Okay, and then here again, we're getting some information that's backing up the idea that it might have been a signal that they sent out. I mean, probably was a signal that they sent out, right? Because first half of that second line in the central section is that they attempted to correspond with the world of the stars in the far distance. However, everything ended in failure, right? So it sounds like they tried to send out some sort of signal, because remember, this is again koshin, right? This is make contact from the gesture. It's the same term, koshin. I was talking about how that's correspondence, but it's also like has this implication of telecommunications. So they seem to send out this sort of signal. They tried to send out some sort of signal in hopes of corresponding with this darker corner of the universe, this primal darkness, whatever it was, right? Which appears to be in the distant starry sphere, right? The distant world of, it doesn't have to be the stars, distant world of the stars. It's Seikai again, right? This distant celestial realm. Because we have, once again, celestial object and then like world, making up the term Seikai. And again, it all ended in failure. So we have explicit confirmation there. And this gets back to the idea of the tragedy of the choir that I was mentioning I wanted to discuss. Because we know that it sounds like they want to get in touch with the Great Ones as almost parental figures, maybe, right? That's speculation, the parental figure thing, but I think it works out pretty well. And we know that the Great Ones want to have sort of these replacements for their children. We also know that they're sympathetic in spirit and tend to respond when they're called upon. I think that's from the Moon Rune. It may just be in reference to one Great One, but it seems like it applies pretty widely. And so it seems like they'd be receptive if they got contacted, and it seems like they want some sort of children of their own. But the choir reaches out into the vastness of the cosmos that they can reach somehow via this rite that involves phantasms as a medium, and they get nothing. The Augur of Ebrietas, you can summon a portion of Ebrietas. Whatever they sent out with this signal just failed. And this also could tie in with the idea of the sky and the cosmos are one, right? Because maybe they try and reach out to the vast expanses of space and get nothing. And then they realize, wait a minute, maybe we've been looking in the wrong place and we should be aiming closer than we think, right? They're not necessarily out in the primal darkness of the higher dimensional sphere, wherever that is. They're just above our heads, right? But they don't get to figure it out. They vanish because, as I was saying earlier in this episode, the choir's gone. We don't really know exactly what's happened to them, but they're not around anymore. And everything that they've tried to do, everything that they've tried to accomplish seems to have just ended in failure. And so you have them reaching out, rejecting the church who sort of raised them because they've rediscovered the thought of Master Willem. They've got that intellectual heritage going on that doesn't seem to be what Mensis is interested in. And they try and reach out. They make contact with a Great One, but that Great One has been abandoned and is maybe looking to make contact herself with beings that are like herself. And so they sort of share this twin fate where they are constantly trying to reach out and constantly failing. And that's really where it ends for them. So I do think there can be this idea of the tragedy of the choir. Like, as high up as they are in the healing church, and as much as they've learned and as much as they've accomplished, they don't really get to do the one thing that they really want, right? They don't really get to achieve the sort of close connection with greater beings that they seem to crave. So that's that idea that I wanted to get back to. And let's move on to the final set of lines in this description now. Right, so essentially, this is a failed product. However, the ritual corresponds with the small explosion of a star or stars, right? Could just be an explosion of stars. Because this, in case it's not clear if you haven't played the game, by using this item is how we perform that spell that we saw get used against us in Byrgenwerth, right? You get that sort of sphere of lights that then shoot out towards an enemy in all directions. And this is the way that you accomplish that. And then the very final line. Okay, and became a special power of the choir. So this is further confirmation. The hunter in Byrgenwerth who was trying to stop us, right, true enlightenment need not be shared. She seemed to make use of this right. Another reason we can associate her with the choir. And then very final portion of the final line. Truly, failure is the mother of success. That's so close to the English phrase, failure is the mother of invention, but it's not quite that in the Japanese. So that's interesting to me, just linguistically. But that gets us to the idea of the tragedy of the choir and the search for meaning among the cosmos that they very clearly were interested in. But then again, right, even when they fail, right, it's become a special power, right? They still are able to make use of this right. So even when they're not necessarily reaching their end goal, they're making the best of it. So that's nice, I guess. And then there's one last item that we can associate with the choir and with Mensis, and it's not a right-hand weapon, it's a left-hand weapon, also used by that one particular hunter in Byrgenwerth. This is the Rosmarinus. And again, this is Latin again. It's a Latin term, which, again, associated with the healing church, and it's rosemary, right? It's the Latin term for rosemary, which is something to do with the sea, I think. That's the Marinus part. It's been too long since I did the Translation Born episode, but I'll probably have looked up the actual answer and put that on the screen during editing. So there is another reference going on there. And again, I just love this association, continual association in the Japanese and in the English of the healing church with Latin. I think it's very appropriate. But anyway, let's get to the description because this is interesting. Okay, special weapon used by the upper layer of the healing church, the choir. Right, so again, upper layer, higher level faction, right? The higher ups in the healing church, the choir as an organization, the Holy Song Troupe, if we want to be literal again. So that's the first line there. Central section, which is just one line in this case, continuously emits an arcane mist using quicksilver bullets, which are mixed with blood as a special medium. Right, so once again, I've talked before about how I feel like the blood is the active ingredient in quicksilver bullets. This may or may not be able to be used to bolster that case because it's pointing out specifically it's not just quicksilver bullets, it's quicksilver bullets that have blood mixed into them that are used as the special medium by which you can continuously emit this stream of arcane mist, right? So make of that what you will. I don't know. There are some people who make a lot of the idea of Mercury and Bloodborne, and as I was just indicating, I'm not necessarily one of those people, but, you know, I can't shut it down, right? So whichever you prefer. Let's move on to the final section, and this is the most interesting one. The arcane mist, which is together with a singing voice or singing voices, is essentially the blessing of the stars, right? A cosmic blessing, a celestial blessing, something to that effect. And then the final line is a quotation. "O beautiful daughter, O beautiful maiden," probably, "might you be crying?" And so obviously you want that quote to sound evocative, but I think, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, it's interesting to think of that as a quotation, because unlike the rest of the description here, it's not like setting up hard facts. It sounds like it's a quote of someone saying something. And we know it's associated with the choir. What weeping or lamenting maiden might we associate with the choir that they would be wondering about, right? Are you crying? It sounds like this final line is a question being spoken to Ebrietas, right? And I think the official translation is, "O fair maiden, why is it that you weep?" It's sort of twisting a little bit into the question of why, but I don't think that's a problem. I think that actually gets at the idea of they don't understand, right? That's sort of the idea. So, yeah, maybe, right, the question might be a little bit better of, are you weeping? Might you actually be weeping? Something to that effect. But the idea of why is it that you weep, right? You still don't understand. You're making it a little bit clearer that the lamentation is happening. Maybe that's a stronger tie to what's going on with Ebrietas than you would get otherwise. I don't know. And again, right, I think part of the point of this line is to just get at that feeling of wanting to understand and not being able to, and being confronted with the sorrow of this strange being, right? That's why I think it sort of ends up working. But it's very interesting to me to think of that as applying to Ebrietas. And of course, this is why I called out in the previous episode, right? It's relevant that we find her in the altar of despair, right? The altar of lamentation, if we want to be a little bit more literal. And she's prostrate at that altar, which seems to be that of, like, bears that striking resemblance to Ram. So, very intriguing. And once again, Ebrietas and the choir, pretty strongly linked. Ebrietas all throughout Bloodborne's lore, like a truly, truly game-defining figure, and very important to the lore and everything in the world of Bloodborne. So, I don't necessarily mind that I've basically dedicated 2 full episodes to her. If not, maybe a little bit more if you count in the whole runtime of this series. But I am a little bit tired of just sitting here talking lore. So I think we should head out into the world. Let's see, is this the right gravestone? I don't think it is, actually, because I don't want to go to the Advent Plaza. This is a case where I want to go to the 2nd floor of the lecture building. There's a little bit more lore stuff here. I'm not going to get into it. My brain is dying. I'm sorry. We've gone too far. I need time to recover. I need time to bring my brain back to life. We're just going to run around and make a little bit of game progress. Okay. Here we are in the lecture hall once again. And I think what I want to do is just sort of go through the enemies here, make things a little bit easier on myself. And as you saw, they're pretty weak to my, like, bolt-based weapon setup here. So as much as I want to test out the arcane rifle spear, not like... I'm a little bit loath to give up the, like, massive advantage that I have with my bolt version of this weapon. Now, I could have sworn... Oh, it's right there. I don't know why this person hasn't fallen. Come down here. All right. You know what? I can't. I'm too curious. I have to know. How much damage is this going to do? 56? What? Do these things just have no HP? Was that damage number, like, bugged? That's very odd. Anyway, picked up a bunch of sedatives. Did I read that description? I might not have read that description. This playthrough is a very important description, so if I haven't, I need to verify that. If I haven't, I need to bring that up. It's been too long. The Old Hunt playthrough has gone so much longer than I thought it would. It's kind of crazy. And we have to be careful because the scholars on the other side of this walk here will throw that liquid at us, and definitely don't want to get hit by it. All right, now that you're nice and close, I don't understand. 64 damage should not be doing that. What if I just take a regular swing at you? 104. Huh. This must be a 1.00 thing. Like, something is not... Something is very wrong with the way that these enemies' defenses have been put together, because they should not be falling this easily. I mean, I'll take it. But if these numbers are to be believed, it seems like my very poor stats are letting down the sort of broken nature of the rifle spear. I've tried to make an arcane version of it that will demonstrate its, like, massive capabilities, but apparently I've not been very successful at that. Anyway. Did not mean to dodge straight into that attack. Meant to dodge away from that attack, like that. Okay. This enemy's values don't seem like they've been terribly affected. How do you feel? Hold on. How do you feel about that? Alright, well, 105. 84. 63. What am I supposed to make of these numbers? Oh, I'll definitely take that. Alright, now we switch back to this one. Yeah, 51. So, I don't understand. Is this arcane rifle spear good or not? It's like out-damaging against this enemy. Oh, not 9. 9 damage isn't impressive. What? Oh, I understand. That's my gun. My gun is definitely not impressive. 105, however. Okay. Maybe I've managed to break the rifle spear after all. Also, just, this thing is incredibly stout. Okay. There we go. I'll take it. Oh, I need to be close, of course. And I did less damage. Right, well, I don't fully understand those damage numbers, but the enemy is down, and that's the important thing. Get that enemy taken care of. Alright, now. We're not going to engage with lore stuff, but I can do a little bit more exploration around here. There's an enemy up there, but that's fine. If it wants to drop, it'll drop. I'm not scared. Their defensive values are bugged, apparently, because 56 damage is enough to destroy them. Alright. Come in this way. Oh, it's an item. I thought it was going to be a note. Is there an item and a note in here? Or am I just wrong about what's what? So that is a communion rune. Which, interesting that we would find one of those in the lecture building. But I suppose it stands to reason. Since they are, you know, Byrgenwerth is the source of everything sacred in Yharnam. So there is that to keep in mind. Alright. Any other... Oh, hello. I'll take those bullets. Especially since my arcane rifle spear may or may not be a big deal. Okay, definitely we have notes in here. Have to remember that. But no items. Boy, the place where I thought I'd find a note, I found no notes. The place where I thought I might find some items, I found 2 notes. Go figure. Again, we're just ignoring those notes for now. I'll definitely come back and talk about them at some point in the future. For now, I just want to open all these doors. Maybe pick up some bullets while I'm at it, because I sort of forgot, but scholars are really good about dropping quicksilver bullets. Oh, look at that! Got to look at the sort of very ungainly pose struck as they fell from the sky. The damage numbers are also, like, minuscule. There's got to be some sort of modifier that isn't being applied, right? There's got to be some, like, multiplier for the offensive and defensive value of those scholars that is not taking effect. And that's why, like, their defense is garbage and they're unable to do hardly any damage to me. Which, I mean, I'll take it. But what a surprise. Okay. And now that we've sort of cleared all that out, we're in a place where next time I can just sort of rapid fire run through a whole series of revelations regarding this particular floor of the lecture hall. Actually, both floors. So regarding this lecture hall, like in and of itself. But we're going to deal with that next time. For now, I'm going to go rest my brain. And as always, of course, if you have anything that you want to share, any thoughts, any corrections, any like further elucidations of ideas, any feedback based off of what I've said so far, I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'm going to call an end to my hunt for the evening, and I wish all of you good hunting. Oh, come on. Wrong folder. Good hunting, everyone.